Miami, Florida State, Auburn. Who's the most hated team of all time? We've got Brad Crawford on to drop his list.
Big news over the weekend. Eddie George is named head coach of Bowling Green. Are we looking at Coach Prime 2.0 in the MAC?
Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State, and Texas all made the Final Four. How did they get back to the mountaintop? We talk about all that and more next on the 24/7 Sports Ultimate College Football Show. .24/7 Sports Ultimate College Football Show. I'm Tom Loy. That is former General Manager Smoke Dixon. Smoke, we have a jam-packed show today. I'm fired up to be working with you here today. Let's start with the opening kick. Eddie George signed an agreement to become the next head coach at Bowling Green. Obviously, we'll get to the Deion Sanders comparisons and all that later, but just give me your immediate thoughts once the news hit your desk.
Household name. Big-time guy going back to the state that he won his Heisman Trophy. Cultural shift now in recruiting in the MAC. A lot of people running in there just because Eddie G is back in town.
Fires me up, not going to lie. To continue this discussion, obviously there's no better guy. Let's head over to the College Football Confidential. We've got insider John Talty. John, always a pleasure to have you, my friend. Let's jump right into it. Why did Eddie George take this job?
George talked today about getting a call from Urban Meyer, of all people, trying to get his interest in the job. Urban Meyer, as you guys know, kicked off his very successful head coaching career at Bowling Green, another Ohio guy like Eddie George, as Smoke mentioned. So that was, I think, kind of the introductory connection between these two. And I think for Eddie George, it's, a natural step in some ways, from being at the level he was at, having success at Tennessee State, being at HBCU, and now taking a leap into, FBS at Bowling Green, a program that has had a lot of success in the past of guys going on to bigger and better things. Mentioned Urban Meyer a second ago. Dino Babers went from there ultimately to Syracuse. Dave Clawson was a former Bowling Green guy before Wake Forest. So there's a real precedent at Bowling Green of guys coming through and ultimately going on to, Power 4 jobs.
John, we've always looked at the MAC and just say, the MAC is probably the best stepping stone for the next big-time job. But my question to you is, how difficult of a circumstance is Eddie George being placed in?
It's challenging. It's challenging for a number of different reasons. I think, as you guys, well know, especially with NIL and transfer portal, it's hard to live at that MAC level. We've seen quite a bit of their top talent go on to, other P4 opportunities. Just this past year, their, first team all-conference guys, 7 of them are going on to other places. Their coach of the year, as they just showed on the screen, Tim Albin, 3 10-win seasons in a row. He leaves to go to Charlotte. So it's gotten hard to retain the talent. I also think it's gotten hard, to go on to bigger and better things as a coach. Again, as I mentioned a second ago, Bowling Green has a great track record of guys having success there and going on to other things. And we've seen it other places too. Central Michigan, guys like Butch Jones and Brian Kelly ultimately going to the Power 5 level. But recently it's been tricky. Lance Leipold's the last one to do it from Buffalo to Kansas. Before that, 2017, PJ Fleck to Minnesota. So that traditional path of being a head coach MAC to Power 5, it's just not happening nearly as often as we've seen in the past. And I think that's hurt some of their ability to attract quality coaching candidates for those jobs.
Yeah, I think that's probably my biggest thing is how it's going to be so difficult to win right away with all these guys leaving, like you're saying. It's not like there's just this stockhold of guys waiting in the wings to emerge. And obviously there's going to be some sleepers, some underdogs, guys like that we've covered, some low 3 stars that signed with Bowling Green. But I just think it's going to be really, really difficult to win right away. And when you throw Eddie George's name out there, there's going to be some high expectations for them to get that done immediately.
Yeah, and that's where you got to stop it and just say, okay, are we aligned with AD, head coach, and what the expectation is year 1, 2, and 3? Because the old model of looking at it was always, get the MAC kids, diamond in the rough. We can find some guys, have them for 3 to 4 years, and get them onto the NFL. Well, the college landscape has changed. You've only had those guys typically for 2 years until somebody comes in your backyard and starts plucking them. So my thing is, head coach and AD, they need to be aligned with the expectations. Is the expectation just go bowling into year 2, and then year 3 try to figure out how do we raise enough money to keep the right guys in our building, or is it a next step? And I'll get to that with you in a second, Tom. But John, just with Eddie going in there, everyone's expecting Deion Sanders 2.0. I don't know if that's the same landscape that he's fallen into, knowing that this is brand new. So what are truly the expectations, win-loss record, because that's all we care about, year 1 or even to year 3?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and this is going to happen over and over again, I think we're going to talk about it with guys like Michael Vick and Deshaun Jackson too. Deion is one of one. I think we have to start there. He is a celebrity beyond just being a successful football player. He also had Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders coming with him no matter what. To the best of my knowledge, Eddie George does not have guys of that caliber. So that puts him in a different spot. I think what you look at what he did at Tennessee State, I think that's a good maybe barometer of it's going to be hard year 1, and you hope to see improvement as time goes on. I mean, Bowling Green wasn't terrible last year. They've lost a lot. That puts them in a challenging spot. Didn't get to pluck anybody from the December portal window coming in as late as he is now in the spring. Maybe he can make some moves in April, but that's still going to be tough trying to get things up and rolling. So I think you have to accept year 1 is going to be really hard. And I think for him moving forward, he's got to figure out, what his style is going to be, what his strategy is. Smoke, I think you made a great point. Maybe it's going for some of these high school guys that are not being taken at the higher levels that we've seen in the past because teams are so portal heavy now, knowing that maybe we only get them for 2 years and they go on to something better. That helps us get other kind of diamonds in the rough in the future. It's challenging, and it's going to continue to be challenging at the MAC level because we don't expect them to pump in serious money, rev share, NIL wise, which we're going to see happen at Power 4, which I think is going to make it even harder for MAC schools.
Yeah, everyone's always saying money, money, money. How much can we pay these players? And it's truly how much resources do you truly have in order to hire the right people to find those diamond in the rough guys that you can bring them in there. And even if you're a household name like Eddie in Ohio, you still have to have boots on the ground and the right eyes in your building in order to find the diamond in the rough. Because if you don't do that, you don't have enough money to go out and purchase them. So for me, I'm always going to say, who are you hiring as your personnel guy? And what is your expectation in recruiting? Are you trying to finish in the top 30? Are you trying to retain your personnel in terms of guys that hit the portal? Are you now dipping down into Division I AA to now replenish your roster, knowing that you potentially might lose out some of the real good players on your own team?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you guys know me. I cover recruiting day to day. But so, John, I'd actually like your take on this. We're talking, you brought this up earlier, Smoke, but we're talking an Ohio legend, Ohio State legend, a guy that went on and he's going to be a Hall of Famer one day. I mean, what do you think his name, what kind of impact do you think he's going to have on, especially the in-state kids, but on the recruiting front, when NIL, the transfer portal, what does Eddie George, the name, impact, and how does that impact Bowling Green?
It's a great question, Tom. It's funny. I had a call with our fellow CBS 24/7 writers earlier. We were having this exact conversation. Like, what does the name recognition for Eddie George work with for a 16 or 17-year-old? Like, I can remember him playing. He was awesome. But, does a 16-year-old know who Eddie George is? I don't know that they do. I mean, I think they can Google him. I think they'll realize, oh, man, this guy had an awesome career at every level. But is Eddie George a celebrity in that way? I don't know that he is. He's incredibly successful in everything he's done, business, been on Broadway. And this guy is a dynamic guy in every respect. But I think, as I was looking earlier, I mean, he retired from the NFL in 2004. I know to me that doesn't feel that long ago, but that's 21 years ago. I mean, there are guys who are graduating college who have not seen Eddie George play while they were living. So I think there's going to be a little bit of ramp up of having to almost reestablish himself in some ways, reestablishing his bona fides on the recruiting level. But I think where it could really help, and Tom, you know this better than anybody, is there's going to be high school coaches all throughout Ohio and other places who do remember Eddie George. And so when Eddie George wants to come into that high school, those coaches can be like, this dude is legit. Like, you might not have watched him, but I know who this guy is. You need to talk to him. I think that's where it can really help him and hopefully, generate donor money and things like that. It's exciting for a Bowling Green to have a guy like Eddie George that you can trot out there to donors and alumni and other people like that.
Now, John, you said it. You hit it right on the head, and that's what I was going to come with in terms of raising money. How much do you truly think Eddie George's name is worth in terms of raising money at BG?
I think it can be significant. I think that's where I think there's value. I can tell you, I live here in Birmingham, and things haven't gone exactly as planned for UAB, but I do know one of the things that they use Trent Dilfer for is taking him to donors and alumni, maybe people that don't care that much about college football, but they've seen him play in the NFL. They want to see that Super Bowl ring. They want to hear stories of the NFL past. We've all been to dinner parties like that where those people love that kind of one-on-one attention. So I think if you could take Eddie George into a dinner party, let him tell stories of his NFL past and the things that he's accomplished, and sell $1,000 a plate, whatever it might be, I think that there's real ability to raise money. I think that we all know too that what the needs are for a MAC school are less than Power 4. We don't expect a lot of these schools to spend a lot when it comes to rev share, NIL. So even just making small jumps, I think can be huge for a MAC school where from my understanding, a lot of them, they're not even getting into the $1 million+ range at NIL. At least they have it in the past. So if you can generate 100,000 here, 100,000 there, it can make a huge difference for a program like Bowling Green.
You brought up we brought up Deion Sanders earlier, and the impact he had was far bigger than just Jackson State. It was impacted on HBCUs all across the country. Do you see Eddie George having that type of impact on the MAC itself beyond just Bowling Green?
It's a good question. I think Deion is just so one of one that it's hard for anyone. Because, again, I think we've all seen him on our TVs over the years in a way that I don't think Eddie George has been that exposed from a media standpoint. Again, I think he's had such a successful career in all these other ways, but he's not, on ESPN all the time. He's not on CBS, NFL Network, things like that. So I think there's going to be a bump. I know that personally, I am more interested in Bowling Green next year than I probably ever have been before, just because I'm curious to see what Eddie George can do. I do think that when we think of the MACtion of games on Wednesdays and stuff like that, I think that there's going to be more eyeballs on Bowling Green now because of that. Is it as big of an impact as maybe what Bill Belichick is going to do for UNC and the ACC? I don't think it is. But I think for a conference like the MAC, you need every win you can get. And I do think bringing Eddie George into the mix is a win for the conference and a win for Bowling Green from a media attention and exposure standpoint. I mean, when was the last time we talked about Bowling Green on a show like this, right? I mean, that's a win in itself.
Yeah, you hit it. We understand that the importance of just a former player and the head coach on Bowling Green. But if we look at it, what's his impact on the entire MAC nation? We got MACtion. Does Eddie bring one more day to MACtion, making like a Thursday night game action?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see. I'm just excited to see what he can do there. And I think it's, we're entering in a really interesting era of college football. And I think Eddie George, he got a job in an unconventional way, but he proved himself at a really hard level. And so I think he's got real coaching bona fides. And I think that there is a real chance for him to have success if he can build, what we think he's capable of building at Bowling Green.
John, and you both, Smoke, you brought this up earlier. This was a great point. How do you think Bowling Green can, or do you think Bowling Green can kind of embrace being potentially a feeder school? As we look at recruiting and NIL and bringing kids on, do you think there's a possibility that they can say, hey, come play for me for a year or two? It may not be the end-all be-all for your process, but it can absolutely give you early playing time, a chance to make some money, and then, you can move on to potentially transferring to Ohio State, Penn State, Notre Dame, wherever. Do you see them kind of embracing that role?
I think it would be smart if they did. I mean, I think that's such a fine balance of you don't want to just straight up announce, yeah, go ahead and leave us in a year. But I think that not being upset when that time comes and knowing that it is a valuable thing that bigger programs want your players, I think it forces you to identify earlier. I think it can allow you to sell your bona fides to future kids. I think sometimes the mistake that certainly we see at the coaching level make, we've seen kind of feeder programs in the past where, they hire a young coach, he has success, he leaves, and, the program gets upset and they want to hire some guy who's going to stick around. Well, sometimes the guy who sticks around isn't that good, and that's why he's not getting attention elsewhere. And so I think you need to recruit the best talent you can. I think if you build genuine, real relationships with the players, some of them will stay regardless as to bigger interests. I remember talking to people around Northern Illinois after they beat Notre Dame and asking, like, how did you do it? And one of the reasons why was we had real conversations with our players, and when they had interest elsewhere, they wanted to stay here with what we're building. And so I think it's possible to do both, where guys know they can come there, and if they have success, they can go elsewhere, but also they can be developed there. They can grow as players and men and all those other different reasons, and ultimately try to leave a legacy at a school like Bowling Green or Northern Illinois or Toledo or all these other places where we've seen them have success in the past.
John, if I was on that private jet with Eddie George the other day, and I was his general manager, before we even got on that private jet, I would have just flat out said, hey, listen, embrace it. Embrace being a feeder system. Embrace being the semi for the P4 level, because that's the only way that we have a chance of winning. We don't have the financial avenue of NIL. We know that we're not going to win in the transfer portal. We don't have the proper resources to truly go out and grind and find those diamond and rough players. So let's get those 4 stars, low 4-star players, high 3-star players, and let's sell it to them. Our job is to help you, but you're going to help us. All I want from you is 2 years of your best years. And if it's just year 1, I'm going to help you get to the best landing spot for yourself. You just have to buy in, because I'm buying in with you too. Because the number one thing that you don't want to get into is now recruiting against yourself and recruiting with P4 schools that you know that you can't win with. So go in with that understanding, live with it. That should be your recruiting pitch, first, last, and always, to every single high school head coach in that state that's saying, you know what, they're not recruiting our kids at the P4 level. Say, hey, don't worry about that. I'll take them. And I'm going to promise you in 2 years, if they do their part, I'll get them to that P4 school that they wanted to get into. And just write that check and just keep on going. Because I think that's the only way that he can do that in 3 years and sustain that, if that's what he wants to do.
You're buying in. I'm buying in. I'm pretty sure John's buying in as well, man. You called Prime 101 earlier. You're 101 when it comes to your information, man. I appreciate you. Thanks for joining us today, John. For more from John Talty and his incredible expertise as it pertains to college football, check out his latest book, The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. Now it's time to drop your ultimate burning questions. Go ahead and toss them in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the show. Can't wait to see what you guys cook up with next. Smoke, last week, we dropped our 24/7 Sports Class of 2026 Top 247 rankings. The scouting team, led by Andrew Ivins, did a phenomenal job. We did not have you on the show, sadly, but we got to get your takes, man. So let's start with the trenches. Andrew Ivins called the 2025 class the year of the offensive lineman. You look at it, it's Michael Fasusi, Andrew Babalola, David Sanders Jr. You get a bunch of guys, very top-heavy. You're looking at the 2026 class, and you think when you look at Jackson Cantwell, Felix Ojo, Kenai Pepe, Emmanuel Iheanacho, it can be just as good as 2025.
They stack up real good, Tom. And here's why they stack up. The athleticism, you see. Strength and movement ability. Those guys, all of them are over 300 pounds. And when I evaluated them, they're all built from the ground up. What I mean from the ground up is they have the ability to play firm. Most of the time when we look at offensive linemen, especially the tackle position, we talk about dancing bear, quick feet. Can they stay in front of the defensive edge player? There's only like 1 or 2 guys yearly at every single level, from high school to college, even the NFL, that can truly beat you with edge pressure. I mean, speed off of it. So when I look at these guys and I say, wow, they can get in and play day one and impact it, it's because their strength and how firm that they are in the run and in the pass game. And they have so much size that if you wanted to kick them inside just to give them a chance to grow up, then in year 2, put them on the outside, you have all skill sets to do that with the developmental process of all the schools that they've had in their top 5 so far.
Looking at this group, when you compare the Nike Next Ones event that I saw, you look at the All-American Bowl, we had Felix Ojo there. I mean, this group is absolutely loaded. But is there one that really sticks out to you as the most day one ready right away?
You know I'm in love with Jackson. and here's why.
Yeah.
Just his overall temperament and the way that he plays the game with power, balance, and body control for his size. And when you see him make contact in that good athletic fitted position, you see a jolt from his hips. And you see his ability to sustain at every level. First level, but knocking guys off. Second level, because his hip fluidity. And again, being a track athlete, you see the dynamic explosiveness, but also the balance with good feet for a guy that's his size.
I think you nailed it. I couldn't agree more. With day one potential, like to start right away, Jackson Cantwell. I think long-term potential for me. Love Felix Ojo. I think, and my I don't have a crystal ball pick in, but I like the Longhorns right now. I think that guy, watching him in San Antonio, special talent. But another group of positions you have a take on is the quarterback room. And again, I mean, I struggle. Andrew Ivins has a thankless job. That whole team of our scouting guys, they have a thankless job trying to, pick and choose 1 through 5. But the quarterback group, let's start at the top. Faison Brandon, our number 1 overall player, number 1 quarterback, currently committed to Tennessee. I want to talk about day one potentially being a starter. How does he become the guy day one in Knoxville if he does what I expect, and stick with that commitment to Texas?
So
Tennessee, sorry.
Tennessee. Same color, same team. Listen, so what I would say is I would put you in the head coaching chair. And it's my job to sell you what this player can do day one if we made him that starter.
Right.
Because I have to paint that picture for you. All you are is a coach. You just call the plays and you get them ready to play. But I would say, just looking at him physically, right now, he's ready to go in and perform for you. He can throw. He can make all the throws. Cognitively, you can see him go through all the reads from all the 7-on-7 from what I've seen him on film. And now you are in a great situation where it's quarterback friendly with Josh Heupel in that offense. So you don't need to make full field read. You just make a half full read, and then you're playing so fast that you're not asked to make checks at the line of scrimmage and set protections.
How about another guy that added his 5th star, went from athlete to quarterback, Keyshawn Henderson? I believe he's number 5 overall in the nation, currently committed to Houston. I think it's going to take a lot to flip him. What does it take for him to be the guy right away for the Cougars?
Well, it really is what is Houston going to take to get him and make him that guy. But it's easy sell for me.
Right.
Athletically, you see it. He can do it with his legs and he can do it with the arm. A true dual-threat, dynamic athlete. That all you have to do now is just build a team around him to fit his skill set. And early on, it doesn't have to be hard. All you have to do is just make sure that he gets easy throws and easy plays in order for him to succeed day one.
One of the best players in the entire country is right here in our backyard in Nashville. Jared Curtis, right outside that 5th star, down to Georgia, Oregon. He's got some visits. He was just at Oregon over the weekend. He's heading to Georgia. What does it take for that guy to see the field day one? We're talking 6'4", 225, big-time talent.
So physically, you said he's there already. Cognitively, we've seen it because he's been through the system so many times. But Georgia, most quarterbacks that play for Georgia, they're not asked to do every single thing. All they're asked to do is just be a great game manager. And the way that Mike Bobo calls his offense, the way that Kirby wants his team built, you run the ball 70% of the time, throw it 30. Now, it's all going to come down to Mike Bobo saying, how many easy free access throws can I give to him and give him the game plan that he doesn't have to go through and make every single check, set protection. We just want to be able to run the ball, easy throws, so we can get them on the field. Now, when you talk about Oregon, Oregon gets into that RPO world of allowing him to play early. RPO is run pass option. Real simple. He's been doing that all his life. Read the first level, get it in that hole. And you can see him throw with anticipation and accuracy that can get him on the field. And he doesn't have to make full field reads. Half field to real good dynamic football players. Offensive line is set for him because they've done a real good job recruiting. So I think that's how you get him on the football field day one.
Real quick, best fit, Oregon or Georgia?
I'm going to say Oregon.
Okay, awesome. All right, let's go around the nation and check out our recruiting map. Obviously, we got some 24/7 sports experts there. There were some big recruiting weekends taking place over the weekend. Let's start with Colin Kennedy on the latest with the Oklahoma Sooners.
Quite literally a massive recruiting weekend at Oklahoma as around 70-plus prospects were in Norman. And some of the headlines here, starting with 4-star 2026 running back Jonathan Hatton Jr., OU reestablishing some contention with a prospect formerly committed to the program. Next up, a number of new offers go out. in the 2027 cycle. The Sooners honing in on a few new targets there. And last but certainly not least, OU's continued pursuit of four-star 2026 quarterback Bo Bentley, despite still having the commitment of Jaden O'Neal at the same position within the same cycle. OU having some productive conversations there, but in general, a very productive weekend for Oklahoma.
North Carolina hosted a massive recruiting weekend, by far the largest since Bill Belichick took office in Chapel Hill. It began with a practice on Friday that had about a dozen top targets in Chapel Hill, and they continued on Saturday with a junior day that ended with the UNC Duke basketball game. Among those who were in attendance on Saturday was Landon Duckworth, a four-star quarterback that UNC has had its eye on since Belichick became head coach and has been trying to get on campus for a very long time. In addition to Duckworth, UNC got Xavier Griffin-Hayes, a four-star in-state recruit, back into Chapel Hill for the second time this offseason, which is also pretty significant considering that's going to be UNC's best weapon when it comes to recruiting Griffin-Hayes, is getting him as familiar as possible with the coaching staff and with the campus. And then also UNC picked up a commitment. A defensive lineman out of Maryland, David Jackson, pledged to the Tar Heels before the weekend ended.
Well, there were a few important targets on campus for Tennessee this weekend, led by five-star wide receiver Tristan Keys. He arrived Saturday in time for Tennessee's basketball game, stayed all the way through Monday morning to attend the Vols' second spring practice. So big extended visit for Tennessee, important as he continues making the rounds this spring and into the summer, with an official visit to Knoxville already scheduled for June. Four-star safety and athlete Joey O'Brien out of Pennsylvania was back at Tennessee for his second visit since October. Also, four-star defensive lineman Damari Simeon out of New Jersey made his first trip to Tennessee after getting an offer from the Vols last month. They're in his top 10, battling for an official visit. And a few of Tennessee's commitments in town to help recruit some of those guys, led by five-star quarterback Faison Brandon, the number one player in the 2026 class on 24/7 Sports. So big weekend for Tennessee to get some of those guys back on campus, continue to lay the groundwork in some important battles that are likely to extend into the summer.
Shout out to our great team site news reporters for giving us that ground on the boots and great information that you can't get from anywhere else. Now, speaking about great information, let's talk about my guy, Brad Crawford. Welcome in, Brad. Now, Brad, over the weekend, got this list that you put together of the top 10 most hated teams. Now, let's preface this now. This is not your personally top 10 most hated list. This is a top 10 most hated list of all time. Now, what went into this, and how did you compile all this information?
Yeah, good to see you guys, Smoke and Tom. All of these most hated teams in this top 10, to me, had two extremely important factors. That was all of them were winners, and they had a featured player or a group of players that was just arrogant enough to be hated, or at least gave off those vibes to a national audience. I mean, 1986 Miami, look, that was 1 year before I was born, okay? But that sort of birthed what the U was as a blue blood. I mean, Michael Irvin, those guys getting off the plane in the fatigues, blowing out Notre Dame in the convict versus Catholics game, losing that championship game too when Testaverde had 5 picks. But with Jimmy Johnson, I think number one to me was an easy choice, but the rest of that top 10 was a bit more difficult.
Smoke, I want to ask you a question, man. What stands out when we look at this entire list and we look at 1 through 10? Obviously, Brad mentioned 86 Miami being at the top of the list, but what jumps out at you when you look at this 1 through 10?
Yeah, what jumps out at me is quarterback play. When you look at the number 4 on there, Auburn, and you go down and you get to Johnny Manziel, then even at the top with my man Jameis Winston. Like, everyone hates to hate a good quarterback, and you have to have someone on your team that can provide that type of play that you can't get from anywhere else, that typically makes most people dislike them.
Yeah, I mean, you see all the Heisman winners, man. Like you said, Johnny Football, Cam Newton had that whole saga with his father and how much money they accepted going to Auburn. That was kind of a reason.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. Baker Mayfield planting the flag. Remember that. I mean, beating Ohio State and then doing that. That was a arrogant move. Tim Tebow in Florida 08 was sort of a tough choice for me. Tebow had millions of fans around the country, but those who did not like Florida in the SEC, especially Nick Saban at Alabama, they just had this disdain for Tim Tebow. He had the whole, blood-soaked jersey game at Florida State. He had the guarantee after they lost to Ole Miss in the swamp. So 2008, Florida just made the list number 10. That was my toughest inclusion.
Brad, here's the only thing about Tebow and that Florida team. I think they were loved. I think everyone loves the great story of Tebow. If you hate Tebow, that's your fault. The guy plays with blood on him. He wasn't that good of a thrower of the football. He had a great team around him. He wasn't like the guy that got pushed off of his team, Cam Newton, allegedly for stolen items. Now, when you look at it, it's like, do you really hate that Florida team? Or you just dislike the fact that Urban Meyer was on that team? He was the head coach of that team, and he had a bunch of really good players. But it wasn't like one guy that I truly just hated. Like we hated Cam Newton at Auburn or disliked Johnny Manziel because he was running around and making life tough for everybody in Tuscaloosa and SEC. Or Baker playing with the arrogance of just saying, you know what? I don't care what happens. I'm going to be one of the first players to plant this flag on your field because I just dominated you in this game.
Yeah, you bring up great points about Urban Meyer. I mean, he's a reason a lot of fans did not like Florida. I was kind of covering SEC football as a rookie reporter at the time, and Florida was just taking the SEC by storm. We were seeing offensive tempo that we had never seen before in the SEC. They were still predicated by defense, but with Percy Harvin and Tim Tebow and some of those, first-round picks they had on both sides of the ball, man, Florida was just dominating the competition. And we know Urban Meyer Smoke late in games was kind of stat padding for Tim Tebow, trying to get him that Heisman Trophy. So there were reasons the Gators were hated.
Yeah, I feel like that's what's wild. Like this is really a list of it's almost like people find a single player. You look at Jameis Winston, and it's like he's the most hated player, so we're just going to hate the entire team. What I found funny when kind of looking at this list, and you look at Jameis Winston, what I think is so impressive is that he went from being this hated guy all across college football to going into the NFL, and he is not only a fan favorite, he's doing the media rounds when it comes around the draft and the combine, but he is absolutely one of the most well-liked locker room guys, and I'm sure that's how he was in Tallahassee, but I just find it so amusing that he went from hated to so well-liked.
Yeah, it all started with the crab legs and the 29-game winning streak in Tallahassee. And y'all remember that last year, the year after he won the Heisman, where they got back to that playoff and got blown out by Oregon. I mean, he had like 15 or 18 picks that year, and they had to come back in the ACC in several games. So Florida State wasn't as elite as they were the previous season, but they still, made it far in the playoff. And when Oregon did beat Florida State, I remember that kind of being the, aha moment of Twitter and social media where just the memes were just crazy dealing with Jameis Winston.
Yeah, with all the crab legs, all the memes, showing up at the game when he wasn't supposed to play, warming up with the team, and then Jimbo having to put him back in the locker room. That was awkward. But you know what, fellas? When we interviewed players from that team, we drafted Ronald Darby. Nick O'Leary was on that team. Not one, Carlos Williams, we drafted Carlos as well too. Not one of those players said anything negative about J-Bo. They all loved him in terms of his ability to lead, bring production, and win games. And I think the reason why everyone outside of that locker room and in Tallahassee disliked him is just because of what we were thinking about. How is this kid getting away with all that stuff? But I'm here to tell you, when you win and you're the best player on the team, you get away with a ton of things.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, everybody loved him in Tallahassee. Maybe outside, the perception, I can still picture Jimbo Fisher, hands on his hips, looking up the scoreboard like, what are you doing out here when I told you not to dress? But still one of the funnier moments. We could bring that list up one more time. I would love to see it because, Smoke, I got to ask. Obviously, we got Brad's take for number one, but what's your take? Who would you have as number one on this entire list? 2010
Auburn, for the simple fact that the greatest football player in college football history was on there. Allegedly, they said he got paid to go to school there. We don't know if that's true or not. But what he did that year in the SEC of totally just wrecking it, game after game after game, and he did it with a smile. Even though everyone wanted him out of there and run him off and he shouldn't be playing because he cheated, accepted money, not one time did you not see a smile on Cam's face, and not one time did you see a team take him down.
And he did it with a bunch of like ragtag guys around him. I mean, this team wasn't filled with all Americans the way some of these now championship teams now are. I mean, they had Nick Fairley. He was pretty dang good.
That's
all
it,
American
Brad.
D tackle.
Brad,
Right.
Brad, not to cut you off, but it was Cam on offense,
Right.
Nick on defense, and whoever was the coach, just listen, just relax, accept this extension check that's coming to you and the millions that I'm going to make you, and then we're going to move on. But go ahead.
So I actually attended the game against South Carolina at Jordan-Hare that season. That was the birth of Cam Newton, man. He had a 50-yard touchdown run, I think early in the second half of that game, where he kind of dove over the pile and did the Superman. And like that was it, man. The Gamecocks had the lead late in that game, and Cam had so many memorable fourth quarter comebacks. Had the game against LSU where Auburn scored like 63 points and he had 500 yards total offense. There was a reason Cam was hated. He had the beautiful smile after every touchdown he would score and just kind of rip the Superman. So, and then the eventual number one pick. So he literally checked every box.
I'm just happy. I'm just happy that you did not mention that comeback in Tuscaloosa, being down by 20-something points. I'm just happy you didn't bring that one.
3 touchdown comeback, and then he blew out South Carolina again in Atlanta for an SC title.
Well, this is what's wild now, and I know you guys aren't really on the 7-on-7 circuit, but for as much love or hate that you have for Cam Newton, his players love him for running a 7-on-7 team. But man, the opposing teams, the fans, they chirp. Obviously, we've seen the off-field stuff where he likes to get into arguments and fights at 7-on-7s, but it's just kind of funny how it's all come full circle with Cam Newton. But Brad, I want to ask you, who just missed the cut? I mean, obviously we have your top 10 list, but there had to be one or two you kind of touching base on that may have made this list.
Yeah, two teams for me, and it was sort of recently. 2023 Michigan going 15-0. Jim Harbaugh. Now we know that the NCAA investigation cloud dealing with the whole Connor Stallion stuff. Did they cheat? Did they not cheat? How much of various opposing game plans did they have? But one note there is Michigan didn't really have a hated player. And you either like Jim Harbaugh wearing the khakis or you hated Jim Harbaugh wearing the khakis. He just is what he is. And then the second team was 2011 Alabama. I did not have one of Nick Saban's teams in this top 10. But I do think if there was a Saban coach Bama team that was hated, it was 2011 because that's the same squad that lost 9-6 in that classic defensive battle against LSU. And then they blew out LSU in New Orleans, and that kind of started the whole SEC bias. We get to see a rematch in the final. So being an SEC guy at heart, I think 2011 Alabama would be my most hated Crimson Tide team.
Brad, and if I had one, I would just say last year's Ohio State National Championship team. And the reason why I say that is because this is the first time that we can go on and say it was truly pay for play. They went out and got the best players that money could buy, and they won a national championship. Before, we've never seen this before. It was usually homegrown or that one player that came in, but they went down to Alabama, got the best defensive player on their team. They went out and got their quarterback and solidified a national championship.
And they went and got Ole Miss's second best offensive player in Quinshon Judkins, who wasn't even running back one last season. That was Travion Henderson. So you're right. I mean, they spent the $22 million or so for that payroll as well as they possibly could have.
Davison Igbinosun was also another guy that they got from Ole Miss as well too, to come up there and play the opposite cornerback. So yeah, they went out and spent the money the right way.
It's funny, we talked about all these hated players, but like with the last two that you guys mentioned, it was really Harbaugh at Michigan that everybody disliked, and it was Ryan Day at Ohio State. So it's kind of weird that for such a long time it was the hated players, but now it was the hated coaches. But Brad, one more before I let you go. Heading into 2025, let's look at this upcoming season. It's obviously looking ahead, but who do you have as a potential most hated team this year?
I'm going to go with LSU because if Brian Kelly makes the playoff, we're going to all hear about it in the media. He's going to say it after every game. I told you guys this was coming. He said last season after they won the Missouri game at the end of the year that I guarantee this team is going to be a playoff team next season. And what have they done? They got the top portal class. They went out and spent money that they did not have 2 years ago when they were doing this same thing. And they're bringing back Garrett Nussmeier, a guy I can consider as one of the SEC's top quarterbacks. So if LSU does make the playoff and Brian Kelly finally gets over the hill and wins the playoff game as a head coach, then we're going to hear about it.
So, Brad, again, is it the player that's hated, or we just can't stand the fact of BK actually winning a national championship at LSU? Because I don't see a group of players that I can say, you know what, I just like Garrett Nussmeier because he did it the right way. I think it's more of Brian Kelly being there, and some of us don't like him that well just because he ran out of a pretty good situation up there in D with you, Tom. I apologize.
Yeah, I think for LSU, it would be Brian Kelly. If I had to single out a certain player, maybe it's Carson Beck for leaving Georgia, taking the cash and having a lovely time with his girlfriend in South Beach, and especially if Miami goes and wins the ACC and gets to the playoff like they could not do under Cam Ward.
Brad, we appreciate you as always. Always good to chat with you, my friend. And for everybody out there, obviously you can head over to 247sports.com and check out everything Brad wrote about his top 10. It's a full in-depth feature. And also you can grab one of our incredible offers and promos to check out all of our coverage from our experts that you can only get on 247sports.com. Smoke, the football doctor. There it is, Smoke FD. Let's talk about the playoff teams. Let's talk about getting back to the mountaintop. There was obviously you're a former GM at Maryland. You were a member of the Buffalo Bills front office. You certainly have experience building teams, but we need a prescription for last year's Final Four and getting back to the top and being a dominant team next year. So let's start with the Ohio State Buckeyes, man. What do they need to do? How do they get back to winning and repeating as national champions?
They give out really good degrees at Alabama. We just don't play football there. So, yeah, I did get my medical license in there. But when you look at Ohio State, the easiest one to say, quarterback. The guy is talented enough. They have playmakers on the outside.
Yeah.
And they have enough ability to run the ball with C.J. Donaldson, transfer from West Virginia. My biggest takeaway is, how are they going to protect the starting quarterback, whoever that is? They went out in the portal and got 2 new guys to come in, but how quickly do they mesh with the 3 interior guys that finished up the season last year?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think it's all about the trenches. It's easy to say, hey, if Julian Saint's the guy, they got enough weapons out there. They got a pretty good kid at receiver, Jeremiah Smith. I think we've talked about it before. He's pretty solid. Some call him generational.
Not me.
But Cornell Tate's there as well. Brandon Innes. You got a bunch of dudes there. The weapons are there. I think, obviously, the trenches are not being talked enough about, especially along the defensive line. But at quarterback, I think a lot of the success, and I think I said it a few weeks ago, was it's all on the arm of Julian Saint if he's as good as I think he is. So the other one, let's move on to Notre Dame. Obviously, finish runner-up. What do they need to do? What changes do they need to make to get back to at least back to the playoffs, but potentially getting over that hump and winning a national championship?
They have to create more explosive plays outside of just turning around and handing the ball off. So I'm going to say offensive coordinator-wise, you have to be able to go out there and design some plays for the non-playmakers that you have on the outside to give easy layups. If that's rubs, picks, playing a little bit faster instead of the slow down, huddle up offense, and just make sure that it's more unpredictable in your play calling.
I think the one playmaker you're talking about is Jaden Greathouse. We got to see what he did. He's a guy, I'm sure Ivans and Cooper, if they're watching at home, they're going to laugh about this, but he's one that I think is just scratching the surface to how good he was going to be. I loved him out of high school, and I saw him as a high-level player heading into the next couple of years. But I think it's also – I'm curious to see how things shake out at the quarterback position. You got C.J. Carr, Steve Angeli, even Kenny Minchie getting some love. So I think it's time for Gino Guidugli, the quarterback's coach, Mike Denbrock, really to earn those stripes and see what they can do with the weapons they have in South Bend.
And last week, I know you were paying attention because I gave your guy, Jeremiah Love, a lot of props and having him as my dark horse, non-quarterback, to win the Heisman Trophy. So I'm going to say, just don't hand the ball off to him. Find ways to give him the ball in space, not only just to help his Heisman Trophy candidacy, but also help you and create more explosive plays if you don't have those playmakers on the outside.
Plus, you got a first-time starter either way in Steve Angeli and C.J. Carr. Very little tape on both, but I think that just getting the ball to Jeremiah Love as much as possible is a huge plus for Notre Dame. But another team in that Final Four, we had Penn State. All eyes are going to be on Drew Aller and his Heisman campaign, a guy that I think will be in the mix for the top overall player drafted next year. What does Penn State need to do to get back to that point?
Create more explosive plays out of the receiver position. Now, they went out in the portal and addressed it with Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross. Now, are those players good enough? Certainly they are. But I'm going to put a lot more pressure on Andy Cole-Nicky to now, how are you creating those explosive plays? Because we saw in the last game that Penn State took the L in, we saw a bad play call because they were trying to give the quarterback too much on his plate too early. And that's just knowing your personnel and understanding the advantage that you have with a really good quarterback, but you have the playmakers now to create the plays on your own as a play caller to now get those explosive plays on the outside, because you're not going to go in and get in the spring portal and get 2 more dynamic football players. This is what you have. You might get upgrade slightly, but this is what you have. So how are you going to complement your quarterback play with the play design with these 2 new playmakers that you got in your building?
And I think you got young tight end Luke Reynolds. He's a future star. I know Ivans Cooper absolutely loved that kid in San Antonio at the All-American Bowl a couple years ago. I just think that this is going to be the money season for Drew Aller. I am extremely excited about him. I think he is going to have a monster year. I think we're going to be talking about him related to the Heisman, related to the number 1 overall pick, and I think he's continuing to ascend the right way. But let's wrap it up with Texas. They got a quarterback everybody knows about, Arch Manning. All eyes are going to be on him, but he's not the only reason that the Longhorns get to that next level. What do you see about Texas, and what can they do to get over that hump?
Here's my fix for the play callers, Steve Sarkisian. Keep it simple. You have a mobile, dynamic runner at times with Arch. But last year, the reason why you did not win and get into that game was because you couldn't pick up a yard. Make it simple. You're bigger. You recruited well in the trenches. You're more physical. Keep it simple. Run the ball more than you want to create dynamic plays for your guys on the outside. And I think this is what's going to get Texas to that next step.
Think about the playmakers and the young guys coming in, Khalil Lockett, Jamie French. I mean, it is an embarrassment of riches in Austin. I'm excited about Arch Manning, but you said it best, like, keep it simple, let him utilize him, but utilize him the right way, and run the football.
See, Tom, I just tried to give Coach Sarkisian an easy layup. Now, you went back into all those little guys on the outside of flipping the ball, running mesh routes, throwing it vertical. Turn around, hand the ball off, and impose your will in the SEC. Over a period of time, if you got to win 16 games, that's the easiest way. Keep the ball in Arch's hands in terms of quarterback runs as well, too, because he can be crucial in the red zone. And red zone is where you scored all the points.
Throw the ball deep to Jamie French. Let's move on to ultimate burning questions. I asked for them earlier, and it is time to answer them. I appreciate you all dropping them in the chat. And the first one is from Julian Espinoza. How do you think Colin Simmons will do this season? Smoke, what do you got?
Seat's kind of warm on this one. I'm going to say SEC Defensive Player of the Year, Nationally Defensive Player of the Year, and could get you in, and he can get himself into the Heisman Trophy race. Simply because of this. Texas is going to be real good. Offensively, they're going to put up points, but I don't know if there's an offensive tackle in college football that can block this young man one-on-one. And we know Steve, even though I told Steve earlier, score points slow, Texas is going to put up a bunch of points. And a lot of teams are going to have to play from behind.
I would love to argue with that, but I have no debate. Colin Simmons is a monster, and I expect a massive season from him. Let's move on to the second question here. Let's see what we got. Rivercat22, has Dabo Swinney gotten his groove back with the latest Clemson commits? They landed 5 over a 48-hour span over the weekend.
You were on a heater earlier when we talked about this. Of all the names that was in there,
Naeem Burrows, Connor Salmon, they landed 2 top 247 receivers, along with 3 offensive linemen.
Listen, all these guys, when you look at their resume and just look at who they are, there's an all Coach Swinney type of guys.
Yeah.
What I mean by this is the blue-collar type of players that want to go in there and represent Clemson first. And whatever they're rewarded later on, they'll get. But this is Coach Swinney's wheelhouse. He's back into high school recruiting, guys coming down the slide. And I was recruited by Coach Swinney. And when you are a Swinney guy, you're willing to do less and stay there than take more and go anywhere else.
I mean, they lost some dudes in the 2025 class. So what this signals to me is that they are doing things behind the scenes the right way. And it's clearly things are, whether you want to talk about NIL or rev sharing, whatever you want to talk about, it's clear that the Tigers have their ducks in a row behind the scenes.
I don't know if you shot this film or somebody else shot it, but the kid that came in, I forget his name, that had the coin in his hand. He said, you know what? I brought this coin with me. I think was it Adam?
Oh, yeah, that must have been like a dad because it was in the office.
Yes. Brought in and said, I brought this coin with me just because I wanted to commit to you today. To me, that was premeditated from that kid. But just the relationship that Coach Sweeney and that staff built over a period of time, you now know that the leader of this class is selling the same thing that Coach Sweeney is selling. Not me, it's we over me, us over them. And he's back to that nobody respect Clemson anymore. We're just going to do this like we've always done. But he can't fool me with that. He's back to his high level of recruiting.
Yeah, from what I gathered, that was an all-in chip, and he got it a year ago when he got the offer, and he cashed it in. So it's pretty cool. I love those moments when the parents shoot him, and it's pretty neat. But let's go.
He kept it for a year.
That's what I mean. Like, I think that's what the case was, and like that's awesome. Like, it's a cool moment. The fact that he remembered it and didn't lose it, that signals that they're getting the right kid to Clemson.
Buy-in.
So, all right, let's move on to the next one. What do we got? Third question. Joey Randito talked about the Miami Hurricanes a little bit earlier. What is Mario Cristobal's ceiling at Miami?
Elite recruiter, so-so head coach. And what I mean that is by game management and just understanding just the feel of your team. Last year, he almost got to it with basically the first overall pick, almost got to the playoffs. And that showed me that he needs more. So I would say his ceiling, record-wise, I think he can get in the playoffs this year. Just because what he learned from last year, I think he can build onto it because, like I said, forget his coaching acumen. He can recruit players there, and he's recruiting coaches to come in and do exactly what he wants.
Yeah, I think he's a national championship winning head coach. I believe he's got enough people around him. I think he can take them places over the next couple years. I like some of the younger recruiting classes that they landed over the last couple cycles, but I don't see it this year. I'm not a big Carson Beck guy. I don't think the Hurricanes are going to be a playoff team in 2025. I don't know. Like I said, I think he's got the potential. I think he's got the right people around him, but definitely not this year.
Yeah, I'll push back and said, yes, they make it just because they learned their lesson and run the football more and ask less for the quarterback to make plays.
Fair enough. Appreciate you, Smoke. As always, you can get all of our coverage from our experts at 247sports.com. We obviously have offers, promos, so be sure to head to your local team site. And as always, stay locked to 24/7 Sports for all of your college sports and recruiting needs. The Ultimate College Football Show returns every Monday and Wednesday at 4 p.m. For Smoke Dixon, I'm Tom Loy. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you on Wednesday.